On March 18, 2024, at exactly 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 million people were watching a TikTok live stream when they heard the gunshot. The screen went black. Comments erupted into chaos. Within minutes, emergency services arrived at an apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, to find 2 bodies and a phone still recording. What those millions of viewers didn't know, what even the boyfriend didn't know until days before that fatal live stream, was that the woman he'd loved for 3 years, the woman he'd planned to marry, didn't actually exist. Her name wasn't real. Her past wasn't real. And when the truth finally came out, it destroyed them both. This is the story of Emma Clark and Daniel Harris, except Emma Clark was never Emma Clark at all. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we need to go back to September 2020, to a charity fundraiser in downtown Charlotte, where 26-year-old software developer Daniel Harris first met the woman who would change his life forever. She introduced herself as Emma Clark, said she worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company and had recently moved to Charlotte from Atlanta. They talked for 40 minutes, discovered shared interests in hiking and true crime podcasts, and exchanged numbers. Their first coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into Daniel realizing he was falling for someone faster than he'd ever fallen before. Emma was intelligent, funny, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely interested in building a life with him. By January 2021, she'd moved into Daniel's apartment in the South End neighborhood. It was Emma's idea to start posting on TikTok together in March 2021. Daniel was skeptical at first, uncomfortable being the center of attention, but Emma was persuasive. Their first video was awkward and stiff, but viewers loved their genuine authenticity compared to overly polished content. They started posting regularly, showing snippets of their daily life, couple challenges, and late-night question-and-answer sessions. By August 2021, they had 200,000 followers, and by the end of that year, they were making around $3,000 per month from sponsorships. Emma reduced her hours at her marketing job to focus on managing their TikTok account, while Daniel continued working full-time as a software developer. Their relationship seemed to be thriving, and Daniel had started thinking seriously about proposing.
Welcome to Silent Witness True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment.
Daniel had started noticing. Emma had told him her parents died in a house fire when she was 21, but her stories about them contained odd contradictions. Once she mentioned visiting her mother's grave in suburban Atlanta, but months later claimed she'd never said her mother was buried there. Daniel had never been able to find Emma's social media profiles from before 2020. No Facebook with years of accumulated posts, no Instagram documenting her life in Atlanta, no LinkedIn showing her professional history. When he mentioned this, Emma explained she'd deleted everything after a bad breakup because her ex had been stalking her online. The financial situation was also unclear. Emma claimed to work in marketing, but Daniel had never met her co-workers, never been invited to company events, and never seen physical evidence of her employment. She contributed to shared expenses regularly, but Daniel had no clear understanding of where the money came from. These concerns remained background noise throughout 2022 and into early 2023. Everything else about their relationship felt right, and by March 2023, their TikTok following had grown to 1.3 million followers. They were making around $8,000 per month. Emma had quit her job entirely, and they'd moved into a larger 2-bedroom apartment. They'd started talking concretely about getting engaged before the end of the year. But on June 15, 2023, something happened that would set everything in motion. Daniel had been working late around 2 a.m. when he got up for water and noticed Emma's phone on the kitchen counter, its screen lighting up with a text message. The preview read, "Sophia, you need to respond. This is getting out of hand. They're asking questions. Sophia." Not Emma. Daniel stared at the message, his tired brain struggling to process what he was seeing. Over the next few days, he found himself paying closer attention to Emma's phone activity, noticing when she wouldn't answer certain calls in front of him, when she'd step onto their balcony to take calls, when she'd angle her screen away from him. On July 3, 2023, Daniel received an email that would change everything. The subject line read simply, "You need to know the truth about Emma." The message claimed that the woman Daniel knew as Emma Clark was actually someone named Sophia Brennan, wanted for identity theft and fraud in multiple states. The email included links to news articles and police reports about a Sophia Brennan from Detroit, Michigan, who'd been charged in 2019 with stealing the identity of a deceased woman to open credit cards and bank accounts, accumulating over $100,000 in fraudulent charges before disappearing before her trial date. The photo, accompanying the articles, made Daniel's stomach drop. It was clearly Emma, though from several years ago with darker hair. But there was no mistaking the eyes, the shape of her face, the small scar above her left eyebrow. Daniel sat frozen, his entire understanding of his life shattering around him. The woman he loved was a fugitive living under a stolen identity, and everything she'd told him about her past had been a lie. Daniel spent 3 days carrying this knowledge alone, unable to eat or sleep properly, going through the motions of their regular life while internally screaming. Emma seemed to sense something was wrong, asking repeatedly if he was okay. On July 7th, Daniel finally decided he couldn't continue living with the secret. He waited until they'd finished filming content for the day, and then asked her directly to be completely honest about who she really was and why she'd come to Charlotte. He watched Emma's face drain of color, watched her hands start trembling. Emma didn't try to deny it. In a voice barely above a whisper, she confirmed her real name was Sophia Brennan, that she'd fled Detroit in 2019 to avoid prosecution for identity theft, and that everything she'd told Daniel about her past had been fabricated. She explained she'd made terrible choices when she was younger, stealing from people to cover personal expenses, telling herself she'd pay it back eventually. When an external auditor was scheduled to review the organization's books, she'd panicked and run, purchasing fake documents and establishing herself as Emma Clark in Atlanta before moving to Charlotte. Sophia told Daniel that meeting him had been completely accidental, that falling in love with him had been the most real thing in her otherwise fabricated existence. She'd convinced herself that Sophia Brennan could stay buried forever, that Emma Clark could simply become her true identity. They talked until sunrise, cycling through anger, tears, and painful honesty. Daniel told Sophia he needed time to process everything, and they agreed he'd spend a few days at a friend's place while he figured out what to do. During that week apart, they texted constantly, having honest conversations about who they really were. Sophia described her childhood in Detroit. Her parents, who were factory workers struggling financially, her younger brother's serious health problems that bankrupted the family. She explained she'd started stealing when she was 22, working at a medical office and watching wealthy patients while her family drowned in medical debt. She also revealed that someone from her past had recognized her in one of their TikTok videos and had been blackmailing her for months, demanding increasingly large payments to keep quiet. The blackmailer had recently increased demands to $50,000, threatening to report her location if she didn't pay within 2 weeks. On July 16th, Daniel returned to their apartment with his decision. He would support Sophia through voluntarily turning herself in, would help her find an attorney and stand by her during legal proceedings, but their romantic relationship couldn't continue. The foundation of trust had been too fundamentally damaged. Sophia accepted this with devastated understanding, grateful Daniel was willing to help at all. They spent the next several weeks working with a criminal defense attorney, planning for her voluntary surrender to authorities in Detroit. The attorney advised that voluntary surrender and full restitution would be viewed favorably, but Sophia had nowhere near enough money to repay what she'd stolen. As weeks turned into months, Sophia became increasingly anxious. She started having panic attacks, waking up unable to breathe, convinced she was going to die in prison. Daniel had moved into the guest bedroom but found himself comforting her through these attacks. Their relationship existed in a strange limbo, no longer romantic but bound together by shared history and the impending legal crisis. In early November, Sophia received another threatening message from her blackmailer, who'd become aware she was planning to turn herself in and was making a final attempt to extract money. The message said, If Sophia went to police without paying, the blackmailer would ensure she received the maximum sentence possible. Sophia's attorney advised them to document all communication and assured her that extortion wouldn't be tolerated. But Sophia remained terrified. On March 14, 2024, 4 days before her scheduled surrender date, Sophia received screenshots revealing she hadn't just been running from Detroit charges. She'd committed similar frauds in 2 other cities under different assumed names, victimizing multiple people with total losses exceeding $300,000. She'd lied to Daniel about the extent of her criminal activity, allowing him to believe Detroit was an isolated incident when it was actually part of a years-long pattern. Daniel discovered these screenshots when Sophia's phone buzzed while she was in the shower. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Even after everything, even after tearful confessions and promises to be completely honest, Sophia had still been lying. When Sophia emerged and saw Daniel holding her phone, saw his expression, she knew he'd discovered her final secret. She tried to explain, saying she'd been too ashamed to tell him about the other crimes, but Daniel was done listening. He told her he couldn't do this anymore, couldn't support someone who demonstrated over and over that she was incapable of telling the truth. He said he was packing his things and moving out immediately, and while he wouldn't actively report her, he wouldn't provide any further assistance. Sophia begged him not to leave, saying she needed him, but Daniel was immovable. As Daniel was packing, Sophia announced she was going to do a final TikTok live stream that evening to explain everything to their followers and take responsibility publicly before surrendering. Daniel initially opposed this, concerned anything said publicly could be used against her in court, but Sophia was insistent. She needed to control her own narrative, needed to be honest with people who'd supported them. Against his better judgment, Daniel agreed to be present during the live stream to ensure she didn't say anything that would seriously damage her legal case. At exactly 9 p.m. on March 18, 2024, Sophia pressed the button to start the live stream. Within seconds, viewers flooded in. The viewer count climbed past 10,000, then 50,000, then 100,000 as people shared links sensing something significant was happening. Sophia waited for the count to stabilize around 2 million, then addressed the camera with a trembling voice. She said she had an important confession to make, that she'd been lying to everyone, including Daniel, about fundamental aspects of her identity. She proceeded to tell the truth, revealing her real name, her criminal past, and her decision to turn herself in. The comments section erupted into chaos as viewers tried to process what they were hearing. Daniel sat beside her in silence, jaw clenched, the tension between them palpable. Sophia was crying as she spoke, explaining she'd never meant to hurt anyone, that she'd fallen in love with Daniel genuinely, despite the lies, and that she was finally ready to take responsibility. Then, 15 minutes into the live stream, Daniel's phone rang. It was Sophia's attorney with urgent news. The blackmailer had already contacted Detroit police that afternoon with detailed information about Sophia's location, but had included fabricated evidence suggesting Sophia had been planning to flee the country and that Daniel had been helping her. There was already a team of U.S. Marshals en route to their Charlotte address, arriving within minutes rather than the days Sophia thought she still had. Daniel relayed this information while millions watched and listened, and he saw something break inside Sophia's eyes. All her careful planning, her attempts to surrender on her own terms with dignity and tact, had been sabotaged. She would be arrested during this live stream, humiliated in front of everyone, dragged away in handcuffs while the world watched. Sophia stood up abruptly, her whole body shaking, and began pacing the living room while Daniel tried to get her to sit down and breathe. Then they heard it. The pounding on their apartment door, authoritative voices announcing this was the U.S. Marshals Service executing an arrest warrant for Sophia Brennan. Sophia froze, her eyes wide with panic. Daniel moved toward the door to let the officers in, but as he reached for the doorknob, Sophia ran to their bedroom. Daniel's heart dropped as the marshals used a battering ram, the sound of wood splintering mixing with shouted commands. Daniel was yelling for Sophia to come back, to not do anything stupid. Sophia emerged holding Daniel's handgun, the one he kept in his nightstand for home protection. She wasn't pointing it at anyone, just holding it at her side. But Daniel knew the marshals wouldn't make that distinction. He was screaming at her to drop the gun before someone got killed. Sophia was crying so hard she could barely breathe, saying over and over that she couldn't go to prison, that she was sorry for everything. The front door burst open and 3 marshals entered with weapons drawn, shouting commands for Sophia to drop her weapon and get on the ground. What happened in the next 30 seconds was captured on video but remains disputed. Daniel lunged toward Sophia, trying to grab the gun before the situation escalated. One of the marshals shouted a warning. Sophia, overwhelmed by panic, raised the gun, though whether she was pointing it at herself, at the marshals, or simply moving it in response to Daniel grabbing for her remains unclear. Multiple shots were fired, deafening in the enclosed space, and both Daniel and Sophia collapsed to the floor. The live stream camera captured the sound of gunfire, of shouting, of chaos, before the phone fell from its mount and hit the floor, leaving the camera pointed at the ceiling while audio continued to record. Emergency services arrived within minutes, but both were pronounced dead at the scene. Daniel had been struck by a bullet that severed his femoral artery. Sophia had been struck twice and died instantly. The investigation would later determine Daniel had been struck by a shot fired by Sophia in the confusion, whether accidentally or intentionally remains unknown, while Sophia had been shot by a marshal who'd perceived her as an imminent threat. The live stream had captured the entire confrontation in audio, 2 million viewers listening in real time as a relationship that had brought them entertainment ended in the most horrific way imaginable. The story dominated news cycles for weeks. The TikTok video was immediately removed, but thousands had recorded it. Sophia's full criminal history was uncovered, revealing even more victims and elaborate schemes than initial reports indicated. She'd been running various identity theft operations since she was 20, moving from city to city and reinventing herself each time law enforcement got close. Daniel's family and friends struggled to understand how the kind, careful person they'd known had ended up in such a horrific situation. The marshals who'd conducted the raid were placed on administrative leave but ultimately cleared. The shooting ruled justified use of force. The blackmailer was eventually identified and charged with extortion, though that felt like cold comfort to anyone mourning the double tragedy. The 2 million people who'd witnessed the live stream struggled with their own trauma from what they'd heard. Mental health professionals noted this represented a new form of collective trauma, millions simultaneously experiencing a violent death in real time, unable to look away or unsee what they'd witnessed. So what can we take away from this tragedy? First, it serves as a reminder that the personas we encounter on social media are curated versions of reality, that perfect couples and perfect lives we see on our screens are often hiding complex struggles we can't imagine. Daniel and Sophia's relationship looked ideal to followers, and in many ways it was genuine, but it was built on a foundation of lies that made it ultimately unsustainable. Second, this story illustrates how running from consequences creates a prison of its own. Sophia spent years living in constant fear of discovery, unable to form genuine connections because maintaining lies required constant vigilance. She was never free because freedom requires being able to live authentically. If she'd faced her crimes in Detroit initially, she'd have served her time and rebuilt with a clean slate. Instead, she compounded original mistakes with years of additional deception that ultimately led to her death and Daniel's. Third, we need to consider the complex question of redemption and whether people who've made terrible choices deserve second chances. Sophia was a criminal who'd victimized multiple people and caused real harm. But she'd also clearly been trying to build something better, to create a life not defined by past mistakes. The love she and Daniel shared appears to have been genuine even if the context was false. Does that complexity make her sympathetic, or does it just make the tragedy more profound? Finally, this story highlights the dangerous intersection between social media culture, mental health crises, and law enforcement responses. If Sophia hadn't been confessing her crimes to millions in real time, would the marshals have approached differently? We live in an age where private crises increasingly become public spectacles, where the instinct to document and share can override self-preservation, and where the presence of an audience can escalate situations that might otherwise de-escalate naturally. On March 18, 2024, Daniel Harris was 32 with his whole life ahead of him. He'd been planning to propose, to build a future, to maybe start a family. Instead, he died trying to protect someone who'd lied from the beginning. Sophia Brennan was 30, talented, and capable of so much more than the destructive path she'd chosen. She died running from consequences she'd spent a decade avoiding, died in panic, died having never experienced the freedom that comes from living authentically and facing mistakes with courage. Think about the secrets you're keeping, not necessarily criminal secrets, but the ways you're not being fully honest with people in your life or with yourself. Think about whether those secrets are protecting you or imprisoning you. Think about the version of your life you present online and whether it's helping you connect authentically or creating distance between your true self and the persona you've created. What do you think drove Sophia to make the choices she made? Could this tragedy have been prevented if anyone involved had acted differently? How do you balance compassion for someone clearly in crisis with accountability for harm they've caused? Let us know what you think in the comments. Subscribe for more true crime documentaries that explore the complex human stories behind the headlines. And remember that behind every viral moment, every trending story, there are real people with real struggles facing real consequences.